Anybody home? Hello? Anybody there? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Anybody there? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Anybody there? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Anybody there? Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Rabbi.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, now I see you. Hello? Okay. Anybody there? Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Rabbi.
Yeah, I just got to adjust.
Yes.
I've just got to adjust this YouTube. Okay. 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 All right. So, hello, Dave. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hello. Hey, Dave.
Hello. Hello, all.
Hi.
Okay. So we have a grand total of 2 students today.
Looks like it.
It's the 18th.
Great quality, great quality.
Hey.
Okay. It's 1 minute past 1, so we'll give it another minute. Hello, Shmuley. Hello, Jeff. Okay, we're getting some new additions here.
Rabbi. How are you, Rabbi? How are you?
Hello, Kent. Okay.
Rabbi, hello everyone.
Hello. So we got half a million.
Hi, everybody.
We're making progress. We got 500,000. Okay, I'm gonna start because it's not a short chapter, not the longest, but not the shortest either. 24 halachas and a lot to discuss. So let us begin, and those who come late will join us.
Hi,
So,
everybody.
Macholot Asurat, forbidden food, chapter 3. You've already had a couple. And now we're going to talk about eggs and chicks and fish and cheese and lots of interesting things. So, halacha aleph, number 1. Kol machol, Any food that is produced from forbidden species to which lashes are given for partaking of is forbidden to be eaten according to scriptural law, which means a forbidden animal, a treifa animal. It's a treifa animal's egg is likewise treif. Which eggs are kosher? Eggs that come from kosher fowl. If it comes from a non-kosher fowl, the egg too will be treif. Even though you could say, well, what's an egg? An egg is not meat. What's wrong with eating an egg? I'd love to eat one of those ostrich eggs. Can you imagine what kind of giant omelet you could get from an ostrich egg? We've all seen those very big ostrich eggs, haven't we?
They say you can make 24 omelets from one ostrich egg.
Okay, thank you for that. I had no idea of the statistics, but I'm not surprised. But an ostrich is not kosher, and therefore its eggs are not kosher. So which eggs are kosher? Eggs that come from kosher fowl. Number 2, human milk. Human milk. What does that mean? Mother's milk. So mother's milk from a woman is not treif. Although the meat of a human is forbidden to eat. We're not cannibals. Even if the cannibal knew how to shecht the person, it still would be treif. You know my line about the cannibals. You know, the cannibal says he's not a vegetarian, he's a humanitarian. So human milk is permitted to be consumed, although the meat is forbidden. But we'll talk about mother's milk just now. It'll come up soon again. Now here's an interesting one. How come we're allowed to eat honey? Over Pesach, we used honey instead of sugar. Okay, it had a hechsher from the Beth Din. But how does the Beth Din give a hechsher on honey when honey comes from a bee, which is not kosher? You may not eat bees. In fact, you will violate 5 or 6 biblical prohibitions by eating any flying insects, just in case you were tempted. So how come if the egg of a non-kosher fowl is treif, why is the honey of a non-kosher insect kosher? So here he gives the answer in number 3. Honey produced by bees and hornets is permitted, the rationale being that it is not a product of their bodies. Instead, it is collected in their mouths from herbs and then expelled in their hive so that they will be able to partake of it in the rainy season. Did you know that? I didn't know it either. I always wondered, why is it that honey is not treif? And here's the answer. Fascinating. Now back to mother's milk. Number 4. Although human milk is permitted, our sages prohibited an adult to nurse from a woman's breasts. Can you imagine? It's not exactly a nice thing. Instead, so let's say an adult needs to drink mother's milk. Maybe the doctor prescribed it for his particular interesting condition, or maybe they're in a forest and they're dying of starvation as the only thing to drink, and it's life-saving. So the woman should express it into a container, and then the adult should partake of it. An adult who nurses directly from the woman's breast is like one who nurses from a teeming animal and is given stripes for rebellious conduct. Now, stripes does not mean that you're given a medal on your army uniform. What do stripes mean? Who knows?
Giving a slug with a cane, with a whip.
Ashes.
Stripes is lashes. In Hebrew, we
Yeah.
call it malchus. 39 stripes. So that's a very heavy corporal punishment. You know, in the Torah, we haven't got time to discuss this whole thing now, the philosophy, but in Torah, there's no jail. The concept of prison does not exist in Torah. There was a death penalty, and there was lashes, and there's financial penalties. But just to sit in prison, incarceration is mentioned on a few exceptional circumstances in the Torah. It is not considered a normal punishment. And in fact, the experience of Western societies today, even in our sophisticated Western societies, in America, they don't have prisons, you know? They don't call them prison or jail. They call it correctional centers. But I don't know anybody who's been corrected in those correctional centers. Often they get worse. So the rehabilitation program in prisons around the world is a terrible failure. Few and far between are the individuals who get rehabilitated, who get educated, and come out and earn an honest living. Most of them, when they come out, they go back to their old ways and they wind up in jail again. So lashes was one way. When a person got lashes, believe me, after that he didn't commit that sin again so quickly. But there's lashes that are biblically mandated, and there's lashes that are rabbinically mandated. So this one, stripes for rebellious conduct, is a rabbinic injunction that a person who behaves inappropriately, that we see that he's drinking milk directly from a woman's breast, is given stripes for rebellious conduct. Now, what about children who are nursing? There's no limitation on a child nursing from its mother. An infant may continue to nurse even for 4 or 5 years. I don't know anybody that does, but in the olden days, it was the norm was 24 months. These days, if a woman nurses for 6 months, it's a lot. If she nurses for a year, it's very, very extraordinary. But in the olden days, 24 months was the norm that a mother nursed her child. So, but you're allowed to nurse as much as you like. But, you know, once the kid grows teeth, it might not be such a good idea. So you could go even for 4 or 5 years. If, however, the child was weaned for 3 days or more, not because of sickness, then he should not be allowed to go back to nursing afterwards, provided it was after the 24 months. If it was during the 24 months, then he could go back to nursing again. Number 6, although the milk of a non-kosher animal and the egg of a non-kosher fowl are forbidden according to scriptural law, so we mentioned eggs, but likewise milk. Which milk is kosher? Milk which comes from a kosher animal. Cow's milk is kosher. Pig's milk is not kosher. You can get kosher goat's cheese today. We'll talk about cheese just now. This is derived from Leviticus. You may not eat from their flesh, which implies that one is liable for lashes for partaking of their flesh, but is not liable for lashes for partaking of their eggs and milk. So it's forbidden, but you will not get lashes for it. 7. It appears to me, says the Rambam, my opinion, that eating the eggs of non-kosher species of fish that are found in their bellies is comparable to eating the insides of the forbidden fish themselves, and one would be liable for lashes by scriptural law, by biblical law, not rabbinic. Similarly, when a person partakes of the eggs of a non-kosher fowl that are hanging in a cluster without being separated from the mother's body or completed, he will likewise be liable for lashes as if he ate the insides of the fowl itself. 8. When one partakes the egg of a non-kosher fowl inside of which an embryo has begun to take form, right? So you have an egg, but inside the egg, sometimes you get a chick, sometimes you don't. Or if you wait long enough, you'll get a chick. If you take it out sooner, you won't get a chick. I'm not sure. I'm not much of a farmer. Maybe some of you know more about this than I do. But here he says in number 8, if you partake of the egg of a non-kosher fowl inside of which an embryo has begun to take form, he is liable for eating a flying, teeming animal, which is quite a severe biblical prohibition. If, however, one partakes of the egg of a kosher fowl inside of which an embryo has begun, he'll only be liable for stripes for rebellious conduct, which will be rabbinic rather than biblical. Here's an interesting one which happens today. Do you know that in every kosher kitchen, we have to check our eggs for blood spot? You know, there was the terrible blood libels in the Middle Ages where Jews were accused ridiculously and absurdly of killing Christian children for their blood to put into our Pesach matzahs or Pesach wine. There was a time in Jewish history when the rabbis forbade Jews in Europe to have red wine on Pesach. Even though halachically red wine is preferable, the rabbis in that time said no red wine on Pesach. Make sure you have white wine only. Why? Because the Christian anti-Semites were coming up with blood libels. So if it's red wine, you could say there's blood inside. If it's white wine, where's the blood? It's white. You know, if there was blood inside, it would have been red. So, and the Maharal of Prague, the great 16th century chief rabbi of Prague, the Maharal, he argued in a famous debate with a Christian clergyman against this idea. He said, this is such a big lie, this blood libel. Look in the Bible, look in the Jewish Torah, you will see we're not allowed to consume blood. You know how many times over and over again the Torah forbids us to consume blood? And you accusing us of being blood guzzlers? This is the biggest lie imaginable. To the point that in every Jewish kosher kitchen, we even check an egg for a tiny little speck of blood and will discard the egg if we find a blood spot. And you accusing us of guzzling blood? What kind of mishigas is this? But such is anti-Semitism. It's not logical, is it? So here he says in number 9, if a blood spot is found on an egg, if it's found on the white, you can just discard the blood and eat the rest of the egg. If it's found on the yellow yolk, then the entire egg is forbidden. Unfertilized eggs, a refined person partakes of them, meaning even a refined person may partake of unfertilized eggs. When a chick is hatched, number 10, even if its eyes have not yet opened, it's already alive, it's a living creature, it's a kosher fowl, and you're allowed to slaughter it and eat it. Now, when a kosher animal becomes treifa, what does the word treif mean? Who would like to tell me?
Forbidden.
Sorry?
Not kosher.
Like
Claire, I missed you. What did you say?
It's forbidden.
Okay, that's the common colloquial understanding. Treif means non-kosher, forbidden foods. But literally, the word treifa,
likely to die within 12 months.
likely to die within 12 months, the word treifa literally means torn. If an animal was torn apart by a savage beast and it is now dying, that was the original literal meaning of the word treifa in the Bible. From that became treif. But literally, treif does not mean non-kosher or forbidden. Literally, treifa means a torn animal, or in this case, in the Rambam here, a terminally ill animal. Even if it was not from an attack by a savage beast, maybe it just had a disease of some kind, and we can see that this animal is not going to survive the year. That would be called a treifa animal. When a kosher animal became treifa, its milk is forbidden like the milk of a non-kosher animal. So this cow has now become treif. We can see it's terminally ill. Even though cow's milk is kosher, this cow's milk is not kosher because this cow may no longer be shechted for using its meat. Similarly, the egg of a kosher fowl that became treifa, if the chicken is injured or wounded or torn and is going to die, the chicken's eggs, the hen's eggs, will also become forbidden, even though normally a chicken's eggs are kosher. 11, when a chick is hatched from an egg from a treifa fowl, so now you have a chick came out of it, the egg we can't use, we said. But once a chick has emerged, hatched from the egg, the chick is permitted because it comes from a kosher animal. When there is an unresolved question whether this fowl is treif or not, then we would hold it in abeyance. We would keep all the eggs it lays in its first batch. If it grows another batch and begins laying them, then retroactively we see that it's still okay, because if it was terminally ill, it would not continue to lay eggs. The fact that it does lay a second batch will now make the first ones permissible. 12. Okay, now we come to milk, and we'll soon get to cheese. The milk of a non-kosher animal, did you know this? It's an interesting thing. There's a difference, a biological difference between kosher and non-kosher animals in their milk. The milk of a non-kosher animal will not congeal and solidify as the milk of a kosher animal does. If the milk of a non-kosher animal is mixed together with the milk of a kosher animal, when the mixture is set aside for cheese to be made, the kosher milk will solidify and the non-kosher milk will be expelled together with the whey of the cheese, W-H-E-Y, the whey of the cheese. Accordingly, number 13, logic would dictate that any milk found in the possession of a Gentile should be forbidden, lest the Gentile have mixed the milk of a non-kosher animal with it. And the cheese of Gentiles should logically be permitted. For the milk of a non-kosher animal will not form cheese. So if he made cheese, it must come from a kosher animal. Nevertheless, during the age of the sages of the Mishnah, some 1500 plus years ago, they issued a decree against non-Jewish people's cheese and forbade it. Why? Lest they use the skin of the stomach of an animal they slaughtered, which is forbidden as a nevela, to cause it to solidify. So, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the cheese making process.
I do it myself, Rabbi.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll help me out over here, Dave. Thank you. So nevela literally means a non-kosher carcass. If a kosher animal died of natural causes, not by the knife of a shochet, not by kosher slaughter, it is called nevela, a carcass. In Yiddish, in the old country, if somebody called you a nevela, it was not a compliment. He's calling you a fashtunkene carcass or something, you know. So don't think he's being nice to you if he calls you a nevela. It was almost like a swear word. So if you would use this, so we're worried, even though cheese can only be made from a kosher animal, we're worried about in the process of cheese making, the non-Jew might have used the carcass of a non-kosher animal to cause it to solidify. Now, question. The Rambam says, if one would say that the stomach skin is such a small entity when compared to the milk that it is used to solidify, should it not be nullified? You know, we have a principle of called botul b'shishim. I think we've spoken about this before, right? If a drop of milk falls into a big vat of chicken soup and there's 60 times as much meat content as milk content, the milk content is halachically nullified and non-existent, and it's still kosher. You mustn't make that ruling yourself. If something like that happens, you must always call your local Orthodox rabbi to ask a shaila, a halachic question. But many times it may be deemed kosher, even though there's a drop of milk, if it's nullified in comparison to the size. So he's asking, why is it not nullified here? There's a tiny drop from the stomach of the carcass compared to the cheese. It should be nullified. And the answer he gives is very interesting. He says, because it is used as the catalyst to cause the cheese to curdle, this non-kosher carcass, and since the catalyst which causes it to curdle is itself forbidden, everything is forbidden as well. So it's not just that a drop of milk fell into a vat of chicken soup, or not just that a drop of meat fell into a big vat of cheese. This carcass becomes the chemical catalyst which makes the cheese process happen. You would not get cheese without it. So it is very significant. And therefore, even though the quantity is small, its quality is extremely significant and therefore is not subject to nullification. 14. When cheese is left to solidify with herbs or fruit juice, fig syrup, and it's apparent these substances were used for the cheese, so that seems to be kosher. So some of the Gaonim, the early sages who ruled that it is forbidden, because the sages already decreed that all cheeses of Gentiles are forbidden, because we're not quite sure what they used in the process. So once a decree has been made, it is made across the board. 15, when a person partakes of cheeses from Gentiles or milk that was milked by a Gentile without a Jew watching, without a Jew supervising, he's given stripes for rebellious conduct. So that's a rabbinic law. So you may not partake unless the Jew is watching to make sure that it's coming from a kosher animal and there are only kosher ingredients. With regard to butter, butter is more lenient. Even people who keep Chalav Yisrael, which I'll talk about more just now, many of them would have ordinary butter because the process of butter is different. The whey in the butter is not mixed with the butter, so it will be nullified because it's a minimal quantity. 16, it appears to me, says the Rambam, in his opinion, that if one purchased butter from Gentiles and cooked it until the drops of milk disappeared, it'll still be permitted. So there we might say that it is nullified. 17, when a Jew sits near a herd of animals belonging to a Gentile, and the Gentile brings him milk from the herd, it is permitted him to partake, even though there are non-kosher animals in the herd. So if there's cows and there's also a couple of pigs in the herd, you can still take the Gentile's milk, he says. Why? Because the Jew is there. All he has to do is stand up and have a look and see where the Gentile is, which animal the Gentile is milking. The Gentile knows that the Jew does not eat pig's milk, and he knows that the Jew can observe him from where he's sitting to see where he's which animal he's milking. So we can therefore trust that he will only give him milk from the cow, not the pig. Here's an interesting thing which I had no idea about. I don't know what you know about eggs. Did you know that you can look at an egg and just by the shape of an egg, you can work out if it's kosher or not? I never knew this. When both of the ends of an egg are rounded, or both are pointed, or the yolk is on the outside and the white is on the inside, then you can know for sure that it comes from a non-kosher species. If one end is pointed and the other is rounded, and the white is on the outside and the yolk is on the inside, it is possible that it is the egg of a non-kosher species, and it's possible it's from a kosher species. Accordingly, the Jew should inquire of the Jewish hunter who sells them where it comes from. If he tells them it's from such and such a fowl, which is kosher, he may trust it. If he tells them from a kosher fowl, but he doesn't tell them which kind of fowl it's from, then we fear he may be ducking and diving, and we cannot trust him. 19, for this reason, we do not purchase eggs from Gentiles unless one recognizes the eggs and is able to identify them as being from a particular kosher species of fowl. We do not suspect that they came from a fowl that was treifa or nevela. That we don't have to worry about. And we do not purchase an unshelled and unstirred egg from a Gentile at all, because we don't know where it came from. 20. Now, fish eggs, same as fowl. When both of the eggs are rounded or pointed, non-kosher. One pointed, one rounded. You have to find out where it came from. Was it a kosher fish? If he tells them that he salted them and removed them from a kosher species, we can trust him. If he tells them they're kosher, he may not rely on him unless he's a person who has an established reputation for observance. So this is a very important principle which applies throughout the laws of kashrut. If something is not self-evident, for example, I can go to any place, any fishmonger, and I can see, is this a kosher fish or not? I don't need the Beth Din to stand with a mashgiach at Woolworths or what's the other place called, whatever, any fishmonger, to tell me if this fish is kosher. Any of us can look and see for ourselves. If it has fins and scales, it's kosher. And sometimes even after the fish has been divested of its skin, it's been skinned, you can still see the imprint of the scales on the fish's body. Did you know that? Ask your wives, they'll tell you. So, but when we cannot tell where something comes from, if we cannot tell whether it had fins or scales, or where the eggs of this fish come from, then can we trust the person who's selling it? So it depends. Does he have a reputation of being an observant Jew who keeps kosher and is careful about it and is scrupulous, that we can trust him? Or is he someone who, although he's Jewish, but if he doesn't observe kashrut and it's not important to him, then he'll tell us, yeah, it's fine. But he really doesn't care. He thinks it's Baba Mises, this whole law of kashrut. So he doesn't keep it, and he doesn't care if he sells us treif. So we can't rely on such a person. Even though they might be a nice Jewish boy, if he does not have an established reputation for observance of kashrut, we may not necessarily trust him. 21, similarly, we may not purchase cheese or fish, pieces of fish, not a whole fish you can see, but pieces of fish that do not have distinguishing signs, unless it's from a Jew who has an established reputation for observance. In the olden days in Eretz Yisrael, when it was populated primarily by observant Jews, you could buy it from any Jew. 22, when a person pickles non-kosher fish, the brine produced is forbidden. The brine produced by non-kosher locusts. Remember, we learned about that there are some kosher locusts. It was in last week's parsha. The brine produced by non-kosher locusts is permitted. They do not possess any moisture. I know you need to know this information urgently. Accordingly, we do not purchase brine from Gentiles unless there's a kosher fish floating in it. Even one fish is sufficient, so you know where it comes from. 23, if a Gentile brings a trough filled with open barrels of brine, a kosher fish permitted. If they're closed, you open it, you find a kosher fish, it's okay. But you need to see the head and the backbone of the fish to make sure that you can tell it is from a kosher species that has fins and scales. For this reason, we do not purchase, here's a typo, we do not purchase crushed salted fish from Gentiles, which are called teret terufa. If, however, the head and the backbone of fish is recognizable, even though it's crushed, it's permitted to purchase from a Gentile. And finally, when a Gentile brings a keg of pieces of evenly cut up fish, and it's obvious they're from one fish, they are all permitted if he finds scales on one of the pieces. Any fish that has scales for sure has fins, we know. That's a biological fact. So if you can find signs of scales and they're all from the same fish, then it's fine. Okay, now we're out of time, and I just want to conclude. I said I would talk about Chalav Yisrael. Now, there's a lot of ignorance and confusion about this. Now, the Beth Din in South Africa gives a hechsher on many dairy products that are not what we call Chalav Yisrael. Chalav Yisrael means that a Jew, an observant Jew, a mashgiach, supervised the milking of this milk on the farm or the processing of the cheese in the factory to make sure that, in fact, it's all from a kosher animal and kosher ingredients and no other stuff is involved. Now, back in the 50s or 60s, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, one of the leading halachic authorities in America, of blessed memory, he ruled that in America, you could rely on government inspection because the government would inspect the dairy farms for safety and hygiene reasons. And they would make sure that cow's milk is in fact cow's milk and there's no pig's milk or anything else in there that's not kosher. On that basis, where Chalav Yisrael was not available, he said you could make do with ordinary milk. The Beth Din here follows that ruling. However, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein himself said that if Chalav Yisrael is available, then obviously that's better. Either way, Chalav Yisrael is a higher standard of kashrut that if it's available, one should try and keep. Now, I heard a rabbi made a very good comment here in South Africa about a year or two ago. He said, he told his community they should try and keep Chalav Yisrael. Why? He said, because the Beth Din is relying on government inspection. Since when in South Africa does anybody rely on the government for anything? We can't rely on them for electricity or water or police protection or anything. Suddenly the government is so reliable and competent. So you don't trust them for anything else. Suddenly for this, you trust them that they're really checking the farm so carefully. You believe that? So he told his community, in his opinion, you shouldn't rely on government inspection in South Africa. And for dairy products, you should insist on Chalav Yisrael. So there is milk and cheese available, Chalav Yisrael in Johannesburg. Obviously, there are certain products that are not Chalav Yisrael, which have the Beth Din Hechsher. I'm just giving you some of the background there. And there's definitely a higher standard of kashrut that one should aspire to, if possible, and practice. Okay, any questions?
Yeah, Rabbi, just a quick one. If you were a mashgiach at a farm, watching the milk being taken from the cow, how on earth would you know if it's not a treifa animal that it's not going to die within a year? How would you know that?
Good question. So there we go by the law of numbers. It's called chazakah. Unless we can see something untoward about this animal, that it's limping or it looks haggard or it's krechzing or something, But the average cow, the average animal, we don't have to be worried that it's terminally ill. In an abattoir, when they shecht the beef, we assume it's fine. If the shochet sees that this animal is limping or something, then he would not use it. He would not shecht that animal. But if we have no positive evidence to make us fear that there's something, an illness about this animal, we can assume by the law of averages that it's fine.
Thank you.
However, what they do check in the abattoirs are the lungs, because the lungs are often perforated when an animal swallows a nail or something, and therefore the lungs always have to be checked by the shochet in the abattoir, because lungs are guilty until proven innocent, whereas the average animal is healthy until proven otherwise.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, guys. I got to run.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thank
Good
you.
day, everybody.
Everyone.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye.